Right, let's get into some of this news, because this actual story about the daycare payment, the $75 a week, kind of has grown and grown and grown. So I've kind of got two parts of it tonight. The first part is speaking to an expert from the Institute of Early Childhood Studies at Victoria University. His name is Sue Cherrington, and she spoke on breakfast this morning, and she spoke about the Family Boost rebate, which is what it's called. And let's have a kind of 90 seconds listen to her, and then we'll have a couple of chats about her, and then we'll go on to see what Mr. Luxon had to say about it as well.
Victoria University's Director of the Institute of Early Childhood Studies, Sue Cherrington, joins us now. Good morning, Sue.
Good day, Daniel.
Why are you not convinced it'll work? Because $75 for many families does sound positive.
$75 for many families will be positive for those families. However, I think it's a policy that's going to be administratively cumbersome for to manage. It's putting a lot of demands back on families to actually manage that process themselves. And I think there's also going to be a large proportion of families who are going to get a much smaller amount of funding.
Yeah, like we noticed about the tax breaks, Chewy. A lot of that heavy lifting being done by up to $75. Now, you're looking a bit perplexed. Do you not know the full details of this? Because I can run it through you real quick if you want.
No,
this is a nightmare.
I caught a little bit of this today, right? So this is them walking back, taking away the early childhood subsidy, right?
Yeah. So early childhood. It was 20 hours free early childhood education,
which we don't like because that's Labour.
Yeah. And so they've brought back in a $75 rebate. Now, I say rebate on purpose because it is actually literally a rebate. Families now have to get 3 months worth of invoices from the daycare centre, send those invoices to IRD. IRD needs to process them and rebate them up to $975 a quarter. This is from the government who wants less red tape. Now, think about that. That means for the first 3 months of the year, you have no help because it's done after the first 3 months. It's a rebate. So you get to the end of the first 3 months, you put your application in. Let's be honest, it takes a month maybe, Chewy, to get sorted out with the 100,000 other people. So therefore, you're now 4 months into the year with no help at all, and then you get a rebate for the first 3 months. And then it continues on. This is the system they've set up.
So, okay. Isn't it? So it's kind of the same thing, but worse in every way.
It's not the same thing at all, and it's worse in every way. Look, there's actually about five things to talk about.
There's more admin.
Yep.
And so both on the parent side of things and the IRD now have to process all these applications.
Yep.
Whereas before it was just like, cool, done. Don't have to do anything.
Yep, done.
Okay, so this is like in retail, whenever you see like you get this via redemption, a big part of that is that they know that some people won't bother doing the redemption, so they just offered you something, and they know that a portion of them aren't going to be redeemed. It's going to cost them nothing, but it still looks really good.
But because that means, remember, the only problem they're solving at the moment is they need more money for tax cuts. So if 20% of people don't get it back, that's $150 million back in their pocket. Jesus says it's not red tape, it's probably magenta. Because, it'll be slightly different. It'll be slightly different. All right, now listen, we've got 4 or 5 clips to play, so let's keep going, or else we're going to be here all night just talking about this, and I don't want to be.
90-minute show.
And tax rebates are not going to work for all our families, particularly those on low incomes and benefits. The bigger issue, I think, though, is that this is a bit of a Band-Aid over what is a pretty broken early childhood system in terms of funding. There doesn't also seem to be any mechanism to be able to ensure that prices are not just going to keep rising and that early childhood services won't, some of them may end up putting up their fees further, because as a sector, they're also really struggling with the inadequate funding that they're receiving. So there'll be strong temptation for some services to push up the price of their fees and therefore start to wipe out the benefits for families.
Now, I've spoken to someone today. I didn't feed anything to them. I didn't ask them any questions, but the first thing they offered back to me, this is someone who's part owner in 3 early childhood centres. The first thing they said to me is, what it means is we can finally put our prices up a bit. That was the first thing that was offered back to me, right? So she's saying they might. And what's happening at the moment in the early childhood sector, and this is coming from the sector through an anonymous source, obviously I'm not going to name who it was, what they were, is that private early childhood centres are scraping through on the bones of their ass. And they've actually had to withhold increases to be that if they added any more on, they would have lost parents and lost children. So they've been eating those increases that should have come. And some of them are going to see this as a time to catch up with that. The other thing that's the problem in the early childhood sector is there are a few big companies, right, Family Foundation, who own a huge number of them. And this is what I was told today. Not the problem, but the reality is they're listed as charities. So they pay no tax. So they are able to be profitable and make money because they have to pay no tax. The private ones, which are the smaller ones that are around town, that are owned by individuals, or like the person I spoke to owns 3 of them, they're all businesses and they have to pay tax. And it's that difference that's eating some of the smaller privately owned ones to ones like the Right Family Foundation's one. They don't pay tax, and that's the buffer they need. And all they need is the buffer to be able to stick around and stay around until the smaller ones have to sell or get out, and then they get bigger and more powerful. So this is the problem in the sector. But as I said, the point I wanted to make is, I don't think we should cast any sort of heat burning coals on people for putting their prices up. They've been eating increases for the last few years because they've had to, but they are now seeing this as a time for increases to come. The government's going to tell us there won't be increases. There's not going to be increases coming. But remember, this is the same government that said supermarkets won't pass on the discounts to the fruit and veggies. Remember, we've talked about this before? They thought that Labor plan bad because they wouldn't be saving people any money, but all of a sudden their plan good, people are definitely saving money. I don't see necessarily that's going to happen. Anyway, so that's where we're actually right now. We've got one more clip with her, then we've got Mr. Luxon as well. Your thoughts, sir?
I can solve this, Pat.
Yeah.
I can solve it. This is classic national short-term thinking, and by extension, reasonably short-term thinking from Labor as well. Why is early childhood up to the private sector?
I think it might be up to about 80%. 80% might be owned by the private sector.
Why is that? Why is it not under Ministry of Education? Why aren't we nationalising the early childhood centres, nationalise the old folks' homes?
I can answer your question.
I
can answer that. I can answer it because that came up in my conversation today. It's because the government can't afford to buy the tens of thousands of early childhood centres that's out there. Like, it would be probably billions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in a lump sum. They can't afford to do it. No, the previous government couldn't. This government can't. That's why.
It makes no sense because this hasn't changed as our society has changed. We didn't need early childhood centres back in the day because mum would be staying home. Because dad could bring in all the money to pay for their mortgage, to pay for their rent. You'd only have one person working. All of this good time shit that people talk about of like, if you can't afford stuff at the supermarket, grow a garden. You could, because you had someone that could potentially have the time to do that. We've changed as a society, and nothing has changed with us to that. You need 2 people working, sometimes even fucking 3 people working.
So
why are we fattening the profits of an ultra rich family that owns a chain of childcare centres? Because of course they fucking do.
Yeah, the childcare centres of yesteryear, obviously they all get money from the government. That's a part of it. Government pays this business to do the job that they were doing with schools and stuff. The way I was told today is that in the old day, you'd get a grant or whatever it is from the government, payment from the government, and that would cover your basics. It would cover your staff and your rent. And that means your fees and your donations sort of became the profits for the business to be able to drive back into the business. But now I'm being told that because of, the person didn't mention the word inflation, but because costs have been going up and hasn't been incrementally going up as much about what the government gives you, now basically the government grant and the fees are lucky if you break even. So that's where a lot of private ones are at the moment. So the person we've just watched from Massey University, there is another part that we won't play, but she says, she's asked, how would we solve this? What's the best solution? And she says, fund ECEs like you fund schools. Now, the problem with that is 80% of them are privately owned, and the government doesn't fund privately owned schools. So there's still a gap in that method, but Chewy, what you said, they could be nationalised, or they could just choose to fund these private entities as they do a primary school. And that's the solution that the University of Victoria, that's right, isn't it? Expert gave in this interview as well, which is not playing, but that's what she said.
It's not a bad solution.
Yeah,
I mean, I mean, it depends on what problem you're trying to solve. I still have an issue with private education providers, I guess. But I mean, we've managed that with schools. It's just roll it out on that model that they're part of the education system, because they fucking are.
It does need something new though, because at the moment a private school gets no funding, a public school gets all the funding, and then there's schools called integrated schools. Now I went to integrated schools, basically religious schools, Catholic schools. Yep. So they're public, but they're private. Yeah. And it's integrated, which means it's partly funded by the government, it's partly funded by the parents. Now that's kind of the model that they're already doing, because it's the early childhood centres are being partly funded by the government and partly funded by the fees from the parents. But yeah, the expert from Victoria University is basically saying this needs to be refunded and redone in a different way. So we'll jump into the next part of the question, because this is a really important part. The question is asked of Sue, how is this funding going to work? Like, how will this government scheme actually work? And this is where we hear about the payment in arrears.
That's right. So parents are going to need to collect their invoices and to then lodge those invoices every 3 months. So that's another task. And I guess part of the issue for me around that is that it's an arrears payment for parents. So actually it's not going to help them right then and there. They're going to have to wait a period before they're going to be able to claim. And I suspect
so how are they going to pay for it for that 3 months?
Who maybe are in a service where the fees aren't so high, or where the child is attending part-time, the proportion that they're going to be able to claim back is going to be much smaller, and some may decide that actually it's more effort than it's worth.
And
which is what you're saying, Chewy. There'll be a percentage of people the household got a new phone the other day, and part of the deal from the new phone was a rebate to get a UE Boom speaker. And to be honest, I'm the kind of person that wouldn't have got around to doing it. Right. But I have a partner who's incredibly fastidious, who got onto it and did the rebate thing and got it back. But there's lots of me's out there that don't do this kind of thing. And that will be, and the people who are getting $10 a week, maybe they'll go, oh, it's just not worth my time, headaches for it. So again, the government that doesn't like red tape, they are making this more bureaucratic. They're making this redder than it needs to be. And when we're listening to Mr. Luxon, there's more issues with making more red tape. We won't get to that right now, but we will have a look at that in a few minutes. There's another question coming from Daniel, I think, and then we're going to wrap this conversation up with Sue.
About effort, does that add more work to your staff, and what impact will it have?
Well, not to me personally, because I'm not teaching in an early childhood centre at the moment, but I think there's likely to be some more work in the sense of, sometimes people will lose their invoices. They're going to have to, have good systems in the centres for ensuring that families are being sent out those invoices and being able to replace them as needed if people lose them.
So more work for the parents, and probably more work for the centres as well, Chewy. But, red tape, less of it, making life easier, getting rid of bureaucracy. That's what this government's about.